receiving the Jo Cox Studentship for me in refugee and migration studies is not just an immense honor at a personal level, but also a responsibility with a lot of sort of history behind it. For me, as a person who was born to a family of refugees who came to Denmark in the early 80s from Iran, I've sort of grown up in a community of newcomers, and I'm very familiar with the kinds of struggles that newcoming communities have in terms of labor, in terms of housing, and various other facets of coming into a new country and incorporating. But this doesn't even begin to sort of compare with today's crisis, with over 10 million Syrian refugees being displaced since 2011. Jo Cox's legacy for me was one that asked politicians to do more in the face of the plight of refugees. And I think that's a legacy that has manifested itself in terms of charities and organizations, NGOs who are doing things in the name of Jo Cox, but also under the principles that she stood for. And the studentship is another manifestation of that. In this time, it allows academia to sort of come in and start asking some of the big questions surrounding the refugee crisis. And sort of with this entrenched crisis in Syria and the political challenges in Europe, though, it's not enough for us to do this without policymakers and without politicians. And obviously it's great that I as an academic can come into this space and do something. But what do you think could potentially galvanize Parliament across the aisle to incentivize politicians and decision makers to come together with a meaningful response? I mean, this is something that Jo Cox did very well. Are MPs like Jo Cox unique?
There aren't enough Jo Coxes around, I'm afraid, in Parliament or indeed in any Parliament around the world. One of the things we wanted to do at Pembroke College when we heard the tragic news of Jo Cox's death, because she was a student at Pembroke back in the 1990s, we wanted to do something that wasn't just there to commemorate her and to say that we thought she was special, but would enable us to take her work further forward. Now, I wish there were more MPs in Parliament here in the UK that had the same sort of bottle that she did to stand up and be counted on this incredibly difficult, incredibly sensitive, almost toxic issue of migration and refugees. We need more people like Jo standing up and saying, we've got a humanitarian duty here. One of the things that I think is really important is how we can build links between academics who are researching facts, history, details, what the actual impact of refugees and refugee life actually are, with policymakers and politicians. And so perhaps I can ask you to tell me something about the research that you're going to be doing and how this might contribute.
Absolutely. So I think parliaments are obviously notorious in good and bad ways for carrying out decisions, whereas academics can ask questions about how those decisions are carried out on the ground and how they might impact the communities that they intend to serve. It's all well to do politics in Parliament, but how politics is understood and negotiated and experienced and perceived on the ground is something that I'm interested in, particularly in the context of incipient diaspora communities and in the context of the kinds of material conditions this might birth amongst asylum seekers and refugees. I have questions, for example, in the wake of how recently some governments have turned increasingly to the private sector and technological initiatives to try and solve questions of housing and questions of jobs and questions of social inclusion amongst refugees and asylum seekers. And whilst this is all good and well, there is only so much that a shiny app or a website can do. In some cases, they might inadvertently end up flexibilizing labor or exploiting labor in different ways, creating precarious housing circumstances, conducting data surveillance, or even just creating resources that are digitalized and automated in a way that might exclude the kinds of very human aspects that are necessary for engagement between newcomers and the host community. And so these are questions that I grapple with. And some of the initiatives that I have come across, however, are initiatives that are very novel and not necessarily based on the newest technologies. One initiative is called Good Call, which is based out of Bronx in New York. What it does is it tries to connect individuals with legal representation through using a traditional technology like a phone hotline. There are other initiatives, for example, based here at the University of Cambridge, the Department of Sociology, called The Whistle, that are trying to develop reporting tools for reporting human rights violations as individuals experience these. And these are very novel and up-and-coming approaches that really don't just develop tools for a particular community with a top-down sort of look, but actually involve the community and work with the community to co-create resources that can grant people access to their rights. Because that's really what we're after here, is how do we create human-centered responses to a crisis that has led different actors to draw on both technology and the private sector and sort of created a bit of a chaos.